Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. On a Monday evening in July, Olivia Shirley suddenly felt as though a part of her life had been cut short. It happened unexpectedly, in the most ordinary moment. She grumbled softly under her breath, sorting through the bag of her husband Arthur, who had only just returned from a sanatorium where he had been visiting his mother. 30 years old, and still like a little child, she thought, going through his things. Why do I have to clean up after him? Eleanor Valentine probably even slipped in her dirty clothes so she could travel light. Arthur, engrossed in a blockbuster movie on TV, heard neither her grumbling nor the surprised gasp that escaped Olivia. "Oh," she said aloud, and to herself she added with bitter irony, "Well, there's your O. There's your reward, you trusting fool. A perfect family life? Here you go. Sign for the deception." Among her mother-in-law's things, neatly folded in the bag, lay a piece of underwear. This intimate item of clothing, clearly not belonging to the stout Eleanor Valentine, might perhaps fit her hand, but certainly not the place it was intended for. After this discovery, Olivia felt as though she had been jolted by electricity, and all the scattered details of the past few weeks suddenly fell into place. The picture of their family life, which had seemed so harmonious until now, appeared in a completely different light. Arthur was cheating on her, hiding behind plausible excuses, and basely betraying their relationship. He had trampled on her feelings. On 7 years of marriage, they had considered happy and strong. Together they had overcome difficulties, rejoiced in each other's successes without a hint of envy, not counting who contributed more to the family budget. Even the absence of children, which worried both their mothers, they accepted calmly, believing there was still time. Liv had married at 18, and only recently had thoughts of starting a family begun to surface, but Arthur hadn't brought up the topic, and she was too shy to speak first. Now the question of children had receded into the background, displaced by a far more urgent problem. Olivia was overwhelmed by the desire to make a huge scene for her husband, one that would make even the devils in hell tremble. She wanted to burst into the room and whip Arthur across the face with that piece of underwear, unleashing all her pain and humiliation. But the first furious impulse quickly faded when Olivia realized she was still holding the supposed homewrecker's underwear. The feeling of disgust was so strong it overpowered her anger. She crumpled the evidence of betrayal and forcefully threw it back into the bag, like a ball into a basket. Her old basketball hobby hadn't been in vain. A moment later, the incriminating item was back where it had been so unexpectedly pulled from. Suddenly, Olivia found it hard to breathe. Her chest felt tight. Fortunately, the washing machine was in the kitchen, and she, overcoming the pain in her chest, where a wound from her husband's infidelity now gaped, took a few steps and sank to the floor, leaning against the cold machine. A thought flashed through her mind. What if Arthur wasn't to blame? Maybe her mother-in-law had accidentally picked up her roommate's underwear. Who knows? Maybe the room was cramped or they shared a wardrobe. Although her relationship with her mother-in-law had been quite normal lately, Liv absolutely didn't want to call Eleanor Valentine and ask if such a funny mix-up could have happened. For some reason, she felt ashamed. Surprisingly, she felt as though she herself were to blame for what had occurred. Loud sounds from an adventure movie drifted from the room, making it difficult to concentrate and think the situation through calmly. How should she behave with her husband now? How should she punish him if he really was having an affair? Olivia meticulously went over in her memory all the moments that had recently bothered her soul and had been happening more and more frequently. The most important thing was his regular absences. For about the last month, Arthur had spent almost all his free time without her, citing strange reasons for his absence. Individually, these reasons might seem valid and justified, but there were too many of them, and they aroused suspicion. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, her husband would say something like, "Darling, I'll run to the dacha first thing in the morning, fill the water tank, water the beds while there's water." Or, "I'll stay a bit late at work. The boss allowed this schedule before the weekend." Arthur also mentioned promising to help a friend, or that they were having a team-building event at work. Yes, all these peculiarities had been going on for about a month, and in the last 2 weeks, his sense of filial duty had suddenly intensified. While Eleanor Valentine was resting at the sanatorium, he went to her apartment every other day to water the flowers. He claimed it was hot outside, the apartment turned into a sauna by midday, and his mother's beloved plants might die. Yet even the owner herself didn't care for these violets so tenderly. Now Liv clearly saw the strangeness in her husband's behavior, which she had previously dismissed as mere attentiveness. Usually, the flower care fell on her shoulders, but not this year. Arthur, hugging her affectionately, said she was already very tired, and these chores were no burden to him at all. Liv even suggested moving her mother-in-law's adored flowers to the bathroom, where it was cooler, and turning on grow lights so they'd get enough light. But her husband opposed this sensible suggestion. He seemed to argue reasonably. Water and electricity unsupervised weren't the best option. But her heart was still uneasy, and now she understood why. Olivia was deeply distressed and had no idea what to do next. It would be good to talk to someone, get advice from an outsider. But who could she turn to with such a delicate problem? The most obvious, but also the most unfortunate option, was to call her mother. Upon learning of her daughter's suspicions, she would get very upset, start taking valerian drops, and her blood pressure would rise. No, her mother absolutely must not be worried. Liv didn't have close friends with whom she could discuss such an intimate topic. Of course, she had many acquaintances, friendly and pleasant women, but she wouldn't dare share her family problems with any of them. It would elicit unnecessary pity, and most importantly, it would be impossible to prevent the leakage of personal information. Her reputation as a happy, prosperous woman would go down the drain. The general director at her work had a peculiar quirk. Only people who, in his opinion, had everything good in their lives could occupy key positions. A harmonious home environment, in his view, had a beneficial effect on work performance. After a divorce or less significant troubles, like a revealed infidelity and conflicts, employees were transferred to other positions. Formalities were observed, salary and employment records didn't suffer, but Liv absolutely didn't want such changes. So there was no one to expect advice from on how to live. She would have to rely on her own wits. Gray spots danced before Olivia's eyes, which always heralded the onset of a migraine. The woman winced. Just what she needed. If a migraine flared up, she would be out of commission for a couple of days. And tomorrow there was a meeting with the commercial director. How untimely everything was. And it was all because of this discovery, damn it. Or rather, because of Arthur and his supposed infidelity. Speak of the devil. The culprit of Liv's headache appeared in the kitchen. He acted as if nothing had happened, turned on the kettle, and started making himself sandwiches. Glancing at his bag, he turned to his wife. "Liv, just forget about the chores. I'll go to Mom's tomorrow. I'll throw everything in her washing machine so I don't have to carry it back and forth. And anyway, let's go watch the movie. It's really good. I didn't expect it." Arthur began to briefly retell the plot of the movie to his wife, but Liv interrupted him. She didn't have the strength to listen to this empty chatter after finding the incriminating item. "No thanks," she said, trying to make her voice sound tired, not angry. "I think I'd better lie down here. I'm completely exhausted. It was a tough Monday." "Okay," he agreed. Then I'll turn the sound down. And you don't turn on the washing machine either. How can you rest with its noise? Should I turn off the light? Liv nodded, feeling the increasing pain in her temples. She really didn't want to talk to her cheating husband. Arthur placed the prepared food on a tray, picked up the bag, and left the kitchen, closing the door behind him. In the darkness, the headache receded a little, and the woman didn't even notice when she fell asleep. In the morning, Liv opened her eyes and mentally rejoiced that the migraine seemed to have decided to spare her and not stage a sky in diamonds. The night's rest had been surprisingly beneficial. Even the certainty of her husband's infidelity wasn't as strong as it had been the day before. Instead, the version that someone else's underwear had somehow ended up among her mother-in-law's things now seemed the most realistic and hopeful. Liv stretched on the sofa, once again glad she had insisted on buying it, and started getting ready for work, preparing breakfast at the same time. Arthur usually woke up later, and this morning was no exception. By the time her husband appeared in the kitchen, Liv had finished breakfast, left him food, and was already poised to leave. "Livy, don't expect me home early tonight," Arthur announced, kissing her goodbye. "I'll stop by Mom's apartment right after work, do the laundry, and check on the flowers. She won't forgive me if anything happens to her green pets." Jealousy and resentment stung Olivia again. She almost flinched when Arthur, as always, came to kiss her, but she managed to endure the usual morning ritual. Olivia hurried to work because she needed to get her usual routine tasks done before the meeting. However, it was difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to yesterday's discovery in her husband's bag. At the meeting, the commercial director even remarked, "Olivia, are you not interested in the topic of our meeting at all?" "Why, Alexander William, I'm listening to you very attentively," she replied, trying to look interested. "Strange," the director drawled. "You have such a distant look, as if you're somewhere far from here." Knowing perfectly well what and how the commercial director spoke, Olivia recounted several main points of his speech. Quite satisfied, Alexander William interrupted her and continued his presentation. While the man rambled on, pouring, as it seemed to her, verbal water from an empty vessel into a full one, Olivia made a firm decision to follow her husband. Fortunately, she finished work at 5, and Arthur was staying late, so setting up an ambush near her mother-in-law's house was not difficult. The mother-in-law's yard was a dead end, and only one road led to it, at the turn of which was a cafe with panoramic windows. If she sat in a good spot, the view would be excellent. She didn't have to worry about Arthur stopping at such a cafe for pastries. You couldn't drag him there with a lasso. He preferred other places. After making her decision, the woman calmed down a little, and until the end of the workday, she was practically not distracted by thoughts of her husband's infidelity. Only as evening approached did she start to tremble slightly. After all, the task ahead was unusual. It's not every day you engage in secret surveillance. Or to be precise, this was her debut in this field. At the cafe, Olivia ordered berry juice and a pastry that the salesperson actively promoted. Only now did the woman, suspecting her husband of cheating, realize that, preoccupied with her worries, she had forgotten to have lunch. The strawberry filling in the pastry was unusually delicious, and the wait wasn't as agonizing. Noticing her husband's car drive past the cafe, Olivia continued her task. Following him was not difficult. He parked the car on the paved lot, took a sports bag from the back seat, and without looking around, entered her mother-in-law's building. A few minutes later, the light in the kitchen windows of her apartment came on. Olivia froze in anticipation. If Arthur had a date, the mistress should appear soon. On a fine summer evening, there were many people outside, as the quiet courtyard offered a shortcut. Olivia's heart skipped a beat every time attractive women walked past the entrance. However, they all walked by, heading further on. Only a few young men with bags entered the building, apparently visiting someone. Under the cover of passers-by and overgrown bushes, Olivia watched. Then the light in the windows went out, and the woman saw her husband leave the building alone, with a clearly empty bag. It seemed he was just waiting for the washing machine to finish. By all accounts, no one had visited him, and Olivia couldn't believe that the mistress home wrecker could live in this same building in a modest Khrushchev-era apartment block. It was too unlikely a scenario, perhaps only suitable for a cheap melodramatic TV series. Despite the fact that her surveillance debut didn't yield the expected result, Olivia decided to observe her husband closely for a few more days. It turned out to be not such a difficult task. At least I'll bring clarity to this whole situation, she thought. It's okay that I have no experience and Arthur might notice me. I'll figure out how to explain. The morning surveillance on Wednesday was thwarted, although, of course, the fact that her husband woke up at the crack of dawn to go to the Dhaka was suspicious. However, Liv simply couldn't afford to take time off work that day. In the evening, Arthur headed straight home after work, which somewhat reassured her. Thursday also brought Olivia no incriminating evidence against her husband. Moreover, in these few days, he had only visited his mother's apartment once, as if he sensed he was under his wife's surveillance. However, Olivia understood it was too early to relax. Who knew what her husband's schedule of meetings with his mistress was, if she even existed? Mentally scolding herself for her suspicion, Olivia didn't even check her husband's phone. But there were so many numbers in the call history, including recurring ones, that none of them immediately stood out. Reading messages and messengers also yielded nothing. Liv knew that there were online chats where correspondence disappeared after exiting, but the browser history on his smartphone didn't show visits to such sites. Realizing that she was just an ordinary person, not a trained surveillance specialist, Liv decided to go all in and try to disrupt her husband's supposed meeting with his mistress. On Friday evening, she suggested, "Artie Pie, we've been staying home too much. Maybe we could take an impromptu excursion? A weekend getaway route?" Arthur smiled guiltily and spread his hands. "No, Liv. I'm sorry. On Saturday, I'm going to Mom's, you understand? I'll be tired when I get back. I won't be up for walks. Sunday is also impossible. My colleagues and I agreed to go to the football match. Look at the stadium they built. Like a spaceship, we have to see what our taxes are going towards from the inside." Liv felt on her skin that her husband was lying to her. All his excuses seemed far-fetched, confirming her suspicions. So, her assumptions were correct. Her husband's meeting with his mistress was scheduled for the weekend. The woman decided to take a risk and go all in. "Listen, that's just wonderful," she exclaimed, trying to look enthusiastic. "I'll go with you to Eleanor Valentine's. It feels awkward that she's coming back from the sanatorium in a week, if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't visited her once. After the sanatorium, we can drive around the area, and that will be our spontaneous getaway." Arthur tried to dissuade his wife. "Liv, you weren't feeling very well at the beginning of the week. I think you need to rest." But Liv was relentless. "Artie, it's just impolite not to visit your mother-in-law even once. Besides, I really need a change of scenery, to get away." Olivia hoped she would get a look at her mother-in-law's neighbor, if she was still there. She was very persistent, and left her husband no chance to refuse the trip to his mother's. Eleanor Valentine was genuinely happy to see both her son and daughter-in-law. They had a wonderful time, walking along the well-maintained paths laid between the majestic trees of the sanatorium. Even the summer heat felt less oppressive in the dappled shade. Quick little red squirrels, tamed by visitors and staff, comically scampered along the branches and descended to people for treats. Eleanor Valentine, anticipating their appearance, had brought seeds and nuts for the walk. Handing the supplies to Arthur and Olivia, she said, "Try feeding these little animals yourselves. They're so funny. They use their paws just like hands." The squirrels fearlessly descended to the outstretched palms with treats, delicately took the goodies, and ate neatly, looking up with their intelligent eyes. By one of the paths, Eleanor Valentine introduced a woman they met to her daughter-in-law. "Livy, meet Annie, my roommate." The lady, of almost immense size, smiled kindly. At that moment, Olivia almost burst into tears of disappointment. The hope that the item of women's clothing found in her husband's bag belonged to her mother-in-law's roommate was shattered. That item clearly could not belong to this woman. Trying not to show her disappointment and growing anger, Liv continued the walk. But the former serenity was completely gone. After saying goodbye to Eleanor Valentine, the couple left the sanatorium grounds, and Arthur, completely oblivious to his wife's changed mood, suggested, "Well, shall we drive around the area as planned?" "Oh, Art, I think I've had enough walking," Olivia replied, trying to hide her irritation. "Let's just go home. I feel kind of worn out too." Arthur, apparently sensing her fatigue, agreed. "Yes, you're probably right. And I have football tomorrow. I'm not old yet, but I have to conserve my energy." Annoyed, Olivia couldn't resist a sarcastic remark. "Yeah, you're an old man, and it seems I'm getting decrepit too." Arthur ignored his wife's displeased tone. He wasn't even bothered that on the way home, Liv barely spoke to him, attributing it all to her fatigue after the walk and the journey. Olivia defined tracking her husband as a decisive stage. Indeed, if he had a mistress and was supposedly going to a football match, which he had never been a fan of, it clearly meant he was going on a date. On Sunday morning, Arthur got up very early, even before his wife, and she was woken by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. When she entered the kitchen, the man had almost finished breakfast. "Okay, darling, I'm off," he said, gathering his things in a hurry. Liv remarked sarcastically, "Isn't it a bit early? As I recall, the football match starts in the evening." The man tried to speak convincingly and calmly. "Well, we'll gather first, chat with the guys, then head to the stadium." The woman didn't make any more sarcastic remarks, so her husband wouldn't become suspicious, and asked, "Are you walking or driving?" "Driving," he replied. "I'm not planning to drink, and I don't want to deal with taxis or public transport. It's more convenient for me. I'm my own boss." "Okay, I understand," Liv said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Then I'll get to the beauty salon on my own. It's fine. Have a good time." It seemed to her that her husband didn't even suspect that she didn't trust him and planned to follow him. The parking lot was a 5-minute walk from the house, and as soon as the door closed behind Arthur, Liv called a taxi and quickly got dressed. The taxi driver wasn't surprised by the passenger's request to follow a specific car. Apparently, it wasn't his first time participating in such activities. "But if you'll allow me, I'll give you a piece of advice," he said, pulling away. "Some secrets are better left unknown. I had a case with my first wife. She kept running off somewhere, saying she was going to the store, under one pretext or another. It didn't immediately occur to me that she was cheating. Understandably, I followed her. Is it pleasant being a cuckold?" The driver, repeating Arthur's maneuver, turned into the parking lot near the supermarket and, choosing the best spot for observation, turned off the engine and continued his story. "So, my wife tells me she's going to the store again, and I thought she was running off to the children's home for the mentally disabled. Her child lived there. She had put him there because it was difficult for her, and only someone who has faced such a tragedy themselves can judge her for that act. Well, back then I was like, in a white coat, playing the saintly martyr. I almost went crazy. How could this be? They kept such a thing a secret from me." Both Lucy and her mother were silent. "Anyway, I caught her at the gates of that almshouse and made a scene. She didn't even try to justify herself, just said she knew we'd get divorced anyway. And whether it was because of the truth or a lie, what difference does it make?" The driver, without asking permission, lit a cigarette, and continued his confession, ignoring the growing ash column. I don't know what I would have done if she had told me the truth right away when we were dating. Maybe I wouldn't have married her. Or maybe, on the contrary, I would have asked her to introduce me to the child. Now I think I could have understood everything if only Luce had been honest with me. But no, it was easier for her to deceive me. What would you have done in my place? Could you have forgiven? Olivia didn't know how to answer the taxi driver correctly, but her husband, appearing in the store doorway with 2 huge bags in his hands, saved her from having to voice her opinion, especially since it wouldn't have absolved the man of his sin anyway. Arthur, not expecting to be followed, didn't look around, quickly walked to the car, placed his load in the trunk, and drove off. The taxi driver, keeping a short distance, followed. He said nothing more, reliving the events of the past once again. The car turned off the highway onto a road perfectly familiar to Olivia. Another 12 kilometers from the turn, and the energetic gardening association would appear. Her mother-in-law had been allocated her legal 600 square meters there back in Soviet times. Liv had gone there even before she was engaged, when she had just started seeing Arthur. Eleanor Valentine hadn't burdened her with much work back then, and even now she preferred to take care of the greenhouse and other plantings herself. She hadn't grown potatoes on her plot for a long time, filling the freed-up space with berry bushes. She had honeysuckle, strawberries, currants, raspberries, and gooseberries there. How could a fan of Chekhov's talent be without it? The newly appeared cuckold. Turning on his signal lights, the family car turned towards the dacha area. Continuing the surveillance by taxi was too noticeable. Olivia asked the taxi driver to stop, and after paying, hurried towards her mother-in-law's plot. Good luck, the driver wished, watching her go. Remember, everything always happens for the best. Liv hurried to her mother-in-law's plot and saw Arthur driving the car through the gate. She quickly headed towards the overgrown lilac bush near the abandoned dacha, diagonally opposite her mother-in-law's plot. From there she could see everything that was happening. Fortunately, her mother-in-law hadn't yet replaced the low picket fence on the street side with metal profile sheets, and everything was almost in plain sight. Olivia almost cried out in anger when a woman in a crop top and shorts fluttered out onto the porch of the dacha house. The stranger's build indicated that she could very well be the owner of the ill-fated item found in Arthur's bag. Smiling, the mistress took one of the bags from Arthur. It was obvious they knew each other, but the phrases they exchanged were indistinguishable at that distance. The deceived woman left her hiding place and resolutely walked towards the dacha to make a loud scene for her traitor husband and his paramour, to the amusement of the neighbors. But suddenly she froze. Her father, Peter Michael, appeared on the porch. It was exactly a year ago that he had basely announced to her mother that he had met and fallen in love with someone else. He said their daughter was grown up now, and nothing held them together anymore, so he was leaving home, taking the family savings as compensation for half of the apartment bought during the marriage. Liv had tried to influence her father then, begging him not to act rashly, imploring him to think about the severe blow he was inflicting on the wife he had lived with for so many years. She threatened to break off all contact with him if he destroyed the family. It was all useless. Peter Michael abandoned his wife and tried to continue contact with his daughter, congratulating her on holidays. But Liv blocked his number, and then all the other numbers he called from. Soon, her father stopped trying to contact her. Meeting her father's colleague, she learned that Peter Michael had quit his job and moved somewhere out of town. Veronica Stephen probably would have gone mad if not for the support of her daughter, who practically moved in with her for several months and made sure she didn't do anything to herself. It's not easy to forget happy years of marriage erased by betrayal. Her mother sobbed on her daughter's shoulder. Can you imagine? He said he met the love of his life. And who was I to him then? Just a passerby? An incubator for his only daughter? Upon hearing this unexpected news, And seeing her mother in such a state for the first time, Olivia was in shock. She had always considered her parents' marriage unshakable, as solid as a rock. However, it turned out that all the years of family life could be very easily erased by one betrayal. Olivia's heart lightened when she saw how tenderly her father hugged the woman she didn't know, how he kissed her shoulder, and how readily and obligingly he took the bag from her. It was obvious that this was the very homewrecker, or in his own words, the love of his life. Arthur watched this outrage completely calmly, and soon the three of them headed into the house. They didn't close the door, and Olivia followed them inside, greeting them with a voice ringing with indignation. "Hello, private company!" She saw astonished faces. Arthur was the first to react. "Liv, how did you get here?" "Oh, I was sitting at home, bored," Olivia replied, not hiding her sarcasm. "Thought I'd go to the football match with my husband, too. And here it's some kind of tango for three, not a match from behind the bushes." "Liv, daughter." "Hello," Peter Michael exclaimed, clearly embarrassed. "I'm very happy to see you. Please meet her. This is Sophie. And this is my daughter, Livy, my pride. This is the one I've told you so much about." Olivia managed to see that the woman in the top and shorts was about her age, and she didn't mince words. "So this is her, the love of your life? The golden hand, leg, or what part of her body charmed you?" she asked sarcastically. "I won't say it's nice to meet you, because I'm disgusted to see her and you, Arthur. And you've really disappointed me greatly. I would never have thought you'd be entertaining your runaway father-in-law and his girl at your mother's dacha." "Don't you dare talk about Sophie like that," Liv's father protested. "Oh, as if she's a delicate violet," Olivia retorted. "Speaking of disgust, by the way, Sophie, didn't you lose your shorts? My Artie must have accidentally picked them up along with some dirty towels. Is it inconvenient to wash here? Or is Sophie afraid of overworking her golden hands?" Peter Michael demanded, "Liv, stop. Enough with the malicious talk. Your husband is helping us at my request, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's a wonderful and responsive person. Don't show callousness and malice towards someone who is completely innocent." "Well, I'd be ashamed to call your Sophie completely innocent," Olivia persisted. "Taking a husband from a strong and prosperous family, forcing him to quit a good job with stable income, forcing him to live not in a normal, well-appointed apartment, but in a dacha house with a bio-toilet and a shower from a tank," Olivia continued, looking at her father. "Forgive me, but she's not in her first youth. Yes, wonderful. Nothing to say. So, Sophie is simply a champion of improving conditions? Maybe she should even get a medal for contributing to a happy approach to the grave." Peter Michael's mistress was clearly uncomfortable, but she remained silent. Liv's dad also didn't interfere with his daughter's angry monologue, which had shifted the focus of her anger onto her husband. She understood that her mother-in-law's dacha had become a refuge for this strange couple. Arthur lowered his eyes, and Olivia didn't need any more verbal response. It became obvious to her that her husband hadn't cheated on her with another woman, but he hadn't acted much better. With Eleanor Valentine's permission, either out of a sense of male solidarity or for some other reasons, he was indulging his father-in-law and his paramour. "You sneaky ones," Olivia gasped, struck by the scale of the deception. "How long have you been hiding this dacha refuge for lovers from me? A month? More?" "Daughter, calm down and let's talk," Peter Michael suggested, trying to smooth things over. "It's not so simple." "Yes, I bought all sorts of goodies," Arthur announced, clearly trying to change the subject. "Indeed. Let's discuss everything at the table." Liv didn't miss the chance to speak out once more about the destroyer of her parents' family whom she hated. "I will not sit at the same table with this Sophie with the golden leg." The young homewrecker, shrugging, said, "Pete, I'll go take care of the plants and pick some berries. Call me if you need help." Arthur gently touched his wife's hand and pleaded, "Don't be angry, Livy. I couldn't have done otherwise. After all, Peter Michael isn't a stranger. And anyway, he's done a lot of good things for us. Olivia pulled her hand away and, without hesitation, started lecturing him. Yes, he's done a lot of good things. I barely saved Mom after his betrayal. I was afraid she'd do something bad, leave me an orphan, and all because of this Sophie. Turns out he found himself a new Galicia. Peter Michael, taking groceries out of the bags brought by his son-in-law and setting the table, remained silent. The man knew perfectly well that his daughter had a quick temper, but was quick to forgive. He decided to let her vent. Sighing, Liv sank into her favorite armchair in her mother-in-law's dacha house and turned to her father. "Well, tell me, newlywed, how did you end up living in the countryside? It used to be almost impossible to get you to visit a dacha. And here, I understand, you've been living for a month, and for some reason, there's a portable shower, a biotoilet, and all that." Peter Michael smiled slightly. "You really are smart. You figured it out right away. Sophie and I actually have to hide. We got into a very ugly, terrible situation. Now we have to hide from creditors." Olivia was extremely surprised. "How did that happen? You were always a fierce opponent of loans?" Her father shrugged. "Well, even old people make mistakes. That's how it happened. When I left your mother, Sophie and I moved to her city. We bounced around rental apartments there. I did odd jobs. We saved money to buy a house within the city limits and start our own business. We even rented a suitable place that was very popular with our target audience. People came to us. But while we were practically in limbo, of course, neither modest advertising nor a big PR campaign was possible. Sophie and I decided to make everything official, buy this house with the plot, and seriously develop everything on a normal scale, not just as we could. I had little money left. It disappeared somehow unnoticed. Sophie suggested borrowing from her acquaintances. Then everything happened like in a bad crime movie. We were robbed on the way to the deal. They cut off the car Sophie was driving under a power of attorney from her friend. They dented the fender a bit, but at least they didn't injure us. Ah, Livy, if you had seen how Sophie defended me, you would never ever say bad things about her. She threw herself at the bandits like a tigress. She threatened them and even warned them that if they so much as touched me, they wouldn't get anything. For anything. It was so brave, so sincere, but so reckless. I was truly scared for Sophie then, and I think I loved her even more. I understand it might be unpleasant for you to hear this because of your mother, but I don't want to lie to you. In short, they pressured us mentally and named a debt amount that was completely out of line. So we had to, as they say, run from the sleepy town. There weren't many options where we could hide. We just need to lie low until Sophie's friend, who has connections in high circles, returns from a trip to India. She went there for enlightenment. One of the main conditions her guru set was a complete break from her usual reality, an absolute refusal of all forms of contact with the past. So I had to turn to art as my closest person. I was very uncomfortable burdening him. If it weren't for him, who knows if I'd be alive now or not. I'm very glad that my son-in-law agreed to solve our problem with housing and providing us with everything necessary. Thank you very much, even immensely to Eleanor Valentine too. She understood our situation and allowed us to stay here. No one will think of looking for us here, so we can relax a little. I understand that Sophie and I are essentially a heavy burden on your family budget, but I promise to reimburse everything as soon as our situation improves. Make a fool of yourself, Dad. Why couldn't you go to the police? If these bandits damaged the car, especially someone else's, and tried to intimidate you, they should be held accountable. There must be some way to deal with them. I think you definitely need to file a report. Of course, a hot pursuit investigation won't work now, but you have to fight this lawlessness somehow. Oh, Liv, how naive you still are, her father sighed. Sophie said their local police station is completely bought off. If you go to them, you could lose your health, or even your life, without trial or investigation. But aren't there supervisory bodies above the police? The prosecutor's office or something like an internal security department? Olivia didn't give up. It's better not to go to them either, her father replied. It's like wading into water without knowing the depth. Anyway, for a proper result, you need a direct connection to someone from the staff. Then the case won't get stuck. When Sophie's influential friend returns, then we can try. But for now, we have to lie low quietly. So, that's the situation, Livy. In my old age, I've ended up in such a mess that I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. Thank you. Your husband and his mother were merciful to Sophie and me. Otherwise, I'd probably be rotting somewhere buried like a dog right now. Peter Michael looked like a tired man, not at all a happy lover, as Olivia had imagined. Somehow, the resentment towards her mother receded into the background. She didn't want to be sarcastic or talk about the boomerang that had come back. After all, this man with anxiety in his eyes remained her dad. The same one who taught her to ride a bicycle, supported her in difficult situations, and explained math and physics problems. He was the one who supported her decision to marry Arthur at 18. Her mother had insisted then that she shouldn't rush, but her father reminded her that they, in fact, had also gotten married almost a week after their high school graduation party. Arthur, sensing that Olivia's mood had softened, decided not to push his luck further and asked his father-in-law in a gentle voice, "Peter Michael, maybe we could have some tea. Let's at least have tea with sandwiches." The man was embarrassed, realizing he was essentially treating his daughter and son-in-law at their own expense, and added, "Remember, Livy, what your grandmother used to say, with your own lard, you grease your own face." For the first time on this difficult day, the woman smiled sincerely. "Yes, and I always used to ask her again what grease your own face meant. Grandma explained it to me every time, as if it were the first time. It was like a ceremony for us." "Dad, I'm sorry, but I really don't feel like eating," Olivia said, getting up from the armchair. "Too much news for today, and tomorrow is a workday. I need to get some good rest before it. And before that, I need to have a serious talk with Arthur about secrets in family life." Although, judging by Olivia's tone, the main emotional storm had passed. Arthur readily hugged his wife and lowered his head guiltily. Peter Michael began thanking his son-in-law again, not forgetting to put in a good word for him. "Thank you for everything, Arthur. Go, get some rest. Only daughter, don't be angry with your husband and don't scold him. He's a gem. If anyone is to blame, it's me." Olivia left her favorite armchair and froze, not knowing how to act next. Should she hug and kiss the dad who had betrayed them years ago? Or just say goodbye? Each of these options seemed inappropriate. The situation was diffused by Sophie, who appeared on the porch with a basket of berries. "Here, I picked these for you and Eleanor Valentine," she said, holding out the basket. "As far as I know, she should be back from the sanatorium soon. We'll manage to figure out where to move by then, so we don't inconvenience her." At the words of her father's young mistress, anger stirred in Olivia's soul again. "How easily you dispose of other people's property and don't hurt yourself," she thought bitterly. Of course, Arthur put his arm around his wife's waist and gently but firmly pulled her towards the exit to prevent another argument. Olivia didn't resist, feeling terribly tired from both the surveillance and the news that had overwhelmed her. Peter Michael went to see his daughter and son-in-law to their car. With a gesture, he asked Sophie to stay in the house so as not to provoke another outburst of hatred. On the way home, Liv tried not to express her irritation at the situation that had unfolded in her life. She was glad her husband was faithful, and mentally praised herself for not sharing her suspicions with her mother. However, how to react to her father's partial return was completely unclear. Fearing that Sophie, distracted by her father, might pull something, she thought about the berries. She brought berries as if she had picked them from her own dacha, generous in throwing around other people's property. At home, Arthur tried to anticipate his wife's every wish to improve her mood. After dinner, he finally decided to ask for forgiveness. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Peter Michael right away. I was afraid you'd be angry." "You were right to be afraid," Olivia replied. "Dad's action was the end of my childhood. You know, I actually thought for a long time that I wouldn't even talk to him, even if he begged for a meeting. But then I ran into him, and I felt sorry for him. Oh, I'm afraid this Sophie definitely doesn't have pure intentions living with my father in a house with partial amenities." Arthur tried to justify his father-in-law's new paramour. "Liv, you yourself understand that you're not judging her quite fairly. It seemed to me that Sophia is very tender towards Peter Michael. She cooks food and keeps the dacha tidy. And anyway, my dear, I think you're being too critical of her. She had a very difficult past, but she hasn't become bitter. Can you imagine? At 18, she had an elderly grandmother, a younger sister, and a brother to care for. Despite all that, Sophie managed to get an education herself, a vocational one, but in a sought-after profession." "I'm completely uninterested in the biography of this schemer," Olivia cut him off sharply. "Arthur, have you fallen under her influence too? How predictable you men are. A cunning woman pulls the wool over your eyes, and you're ready to defend her and ruin families because of her." "Liv, you just didn't see how tenderly she cares for Peter Michael," Arthur insisted. "It's impossible to fake, and how she defended him during the attack." "But you didn't see that," Olivia reasonably countered. "Fear has big eyes, and it's quite possible that the incident was completely different in reality." The woman was angry and didn't want to elaborate on the topic of her father and his girlfriend's relationship. Therefore, she summed up the topic. "Okay, maybe it's none of my business. I'll just tell you one thing. It would probably be reasonable for my dad and this girlfriend of his to rent a dacha in the same area. I think there were a few options there." Arthur supported his wife's idea. "Of course, you're right. My mother is used to being alone everywhere, both in the city apartment and at the dacha. She won't like it if someone else is managing her territory at the same time as her. I'll post an ad in the dacha chat now that we'll rent a dacha for at least the rest of the season. I'll be driving Mom anyway, and that way I can also stop by Peter Michael's. Well, and then, as your dad said, this neighbor's influential friend will return, and maybe the whole situation will be resolved peacefully. Actually, you and I have bank accounts, and we could withdraw money and help Peter Michael out." "Are you completely out of your mind?" Olivia exclaimed, shocked by his suggestion. "Dad betrayed me and Mom. You haven't experienced 1/100th of the emotional suffering we have. And now I have to give him my and your savings? And lose interest too? They'll get a fig, not money." "Okay, darling, calm down," Arthur hurried, seeing her fury. "I understand. We won't touch the accounts." When talking and meeting with her mother, Liv was afraid of letting slip that she knew where her father was. And Eleanor Valentine also kept Peter Michael's secret. They couldn't rent a well-appointed dacha, but Arthur was offered a neglected plot almost at the edge of the area for practically nothing, just covering the cost of water and electricity. The location would have been terrible for people who went to the dacha for the harvest. But for forced fugitives, it was hard to imagine a better option. Peter Michael and Sophia, gathering their few belongings, moved to the new place. Arthur continued to provide them with everything necessary, and soon this began to greatly irritate Liv. Firstly, the funds were taken from the family budget, which angered her. And secondly, and most importantly, the woman was disgusted by the need to protect her father and his mistress. Liv felt that by doing so, she was betraying her own mother. Keeping the secret became increasingly difficult. especially since her mother-in-law planned to celebrate her anniversary at the dacha in early August. Because of this, Olivia was very worried. A meeting between her mother and father at Eleanor Valentine's dacha was absolutely impossible. This could not be allowed to happen. A week before the celebration, the woman asked Arthur to take her to the dacha so she could have a serious talk with her father. She wanted to firmly explain that the following weekend, he and this Sophie with the golden leg should stay in the house practically without leaving. Leaving her husband and mother-in-law at the plot, Olivia walked along the line of dacha plots towards her father's house. She knew that many owners of these 600 square meters had long abandoned them, and it was almost impossible to drive down the street due to the wild sea buckthorn and lilac bushes. But the lush vegetation provided shade, which was such a relief in the abnormally hot August weather. Olivia walked slowly, rehearsing in her mind what and how she would say to her father. Almost at the gate of the desired plot, the woman heard Sophie's hateful voice. Liv was about to enter and tactlessly interrupt the other person's conversation, but then some eighth sense made her stop. Her father's mistress's words were very unexpected. "No, Mark. I told you nothing is working out yet. That nasty Olivia is ruining my whole plan. If it weren't for her, I would have gotten everything out of these fools by now. As it is, I have to live at someone else's dacha, go to the toilet outside, and wash when the water in the tank heats up. The worst thing is having to look faithfully into the eyes of that elderly idiot. At least because of this heat, any attraction he has to me disappears, and I don't have to go to bed with him. Although, it's not even a bed here, but some kind of utter mockery. Ah, dear Mark, you probably won't recognize me after these few months. I haven't been to a spa, or the gym, or even a cosmetologist. I'm an utter scarecrow," Sophie whined into the phone. "But it's good enough for that fool Pete. I just need to persuade him to sell his share of the apartment here, and then we'll get that property. Real estate prices here are almost like the capitals. That money, along with what we got from the fake robbery, will be enough for us to leave here and live normally somewhere on the coast." Sophie's intonation changed from annoyed to whining, and it was clear how artfully this cynical woman was manipulating her interlocutor. However, this admiration would have been much stronger if Sophie were an actress on stage. As it was completely unclear when her father's paramour was lying and when she was telling at least some truth. Liv was almost not surprised by what she heard. She had suspected something like this. Fortunately, she had the sense to turn on the voice recorder on her phone. If she wanted to, she could make out everything. Towards the end of the conversation, her father's mistress's speech was a continuous string of exclamations and complaints. She talked about how much she missed her Mark. And Olivia became incredibly curious how Sophie would react now if she knew that such incriminating evidence existed against her. Olivia restrained herself, waited until her father's mistress finished the conversation, and only then came out of her hiding place. It was obvious to Liv that Sophie was extorting money from her father, but it was difficult to prove without irrefutable evidence. So she had to provoke the greedy Sophie and show her dad the true nature of the woman because of whom he had destroyed a happy family. Deciding she wouldn't hear anything new, Olivia turned off the recording and walked towards the house, feigning nonchalance. She decided it would be better to give her father the recorded conversation herself. Seeing Olivia, Sophie broke into a false smile. "Oh, hello, Livy. Come in, please. I made some soup here. It's tasty, I think. Let me treat you for now, and then Dad will come. He went to the spring, thinking no one he knows would meet him there." Olivia didn't say everything she wanted to and clarified, "How long has Dad been living with you?" Sophie replied evasively, "Not much of interest." Meeting her father on the forest path, Liv stopped him and asked, "Listen to me and try to believe. Sophie is just using you to get money. The attack on you and her was staged, and here at the dachas, she's hiding with you from a fake danger. Here, listen to the recording I made. Peter Michael listened to Sophie's rambling and cynical speech, and his face changed. He looked pitiful, but Liv didn't stop the recording. It was better to swallow the bitter pill of truth right away. "Yes, daughter. Modern technology has come a long way," he said when the recording ended, trying to find an excuse. "Admit it. You just somehow managed to synthesize Sophie's voice to make me quarrel with her." Olivia was disheartened. She realized that her father's feelings for this impudent, unprincipled liar were deep and perhaps blind. Any attempts to tell or even provide visual evidence that the mistress intended to acquire elite real estate at the expense of others would be met with displeasure and even arguments. She had to find another way to convince her father, to open his eyes. "Dad, I beg you, don't rush to get money for her," Olivia said, considering a new plan. "She'll come up with something else to fleece you. So, I'll set up a test for her. I'll say we've received the money to pay off the debts, and you and Arthur will watch her to see how she reacts. It would also be good to have a few strong guys help us. I think that's doable." "Dad, let's go to our place for now to discuss all the details," Olivia suggested. Without looking into his overgrown house, Peter Michael headed towards his son-in-law's, accompanied by his daughter. In the evening, the mistress again noticed that Peter Michael was distant towards her, but didn't pay much attention to it, especially since this aloofness suited her perfectly. Only when the man announced that his son-in-law had agreed to provide the money, but only in cash, did Sophie almost jump for joy. "My love, my sunshine, now we can return to our usual way of life. Isn't it a miracle?" Arthur smiled, listening to her. So far, everything was going exactly as they had planned. Thanks to a friend of his, he managed to enlist the help of former Special Forces soldiers to apprehend the fraudsters. When Sophie's accomplices arrived at the dacha, squeezing with difficulty along the overgrown road, the brave guys immediately subdued them. They treated Sophia very delicately, and Peter Michael, coming close, announced, "Sophie, despite your wise name, you wanted to deceive me again. But you didn't consider that you talk too much, and in places you shouldn't. Fortunately, Olivia overheard your candid conversation. So, if you don't want to end up in prison for fraud and drag these fools with you, pay me back what you stole from me with the help of your pals." Sophie had no choice but to write a receipt for the required amount. Happy and relieved, Peter Michael asked Arthur to drive him to the city and hurried to his wife, buying a gorgeous bouquet of flowers on the way. "Veronica, it's as if I was forgotten like sunken water," he said, handing over the flowers. "Let's try to start our relationship anew." Veronica Stevens smiled at her ex-husband, and he thought he had found the key to her heart. But the woman suddenly announced, "Actually, I've already started a new love story, and you don't fit into it. So, if you want the honest truth, during the divorce, you took out almost everything you brought in, and I didn't fight for a single thing. If they were important to you, you took them. And now you suddenly realized you undersold yourself. You're left with nothing. Although with the sum returned by Sophie N.